And so let me begin by just welcoming everyone, saying good morning and thanking you all for joining us. My name is Mike Talbot. I am Notre Dame International's Director for Initiatives in Mexico. Today is the 6th in the Mexico Virtual Lecture Series presented by Notre Dame's Mexico Global Center. These lectures are intended to highlight work of Notre Dame faculty across the university who are working in or with or on Mexico. It's also intended to deepen our relationships here with alumni, parents, research collaborators, and interested parties. So we're very glad that you could join us today. Before we begin, two requests that I'm sure we've all grown accustomed to at this point. First, please keep your microphones on mute. This will just help prevent background noise from interrupting the presentation. Second is we welcome your questions throughout. Professor Rivera will answer them at the end, but if during the presentation you have a question, please feel free to enter it into the chat feature, which is at the bottom of your screen, labeled chat, and Dr. Rivera will respond at the end. So today we are pleased to have Dr. Estela Rivero with us. She is a research associate with Notre Dame's Pulte Institute for Global Development. Dr. Rivera holds a bachelor's degree from UNAM here in Mexico City, a master's from Colegio de Mexico, COMEX, and a PhD in demography and public affairs from Princeton. As you can imagine with that background, she has extensive experience in Mexico and has deep connections here. She's conducted a wide variety of research on themes including gender, migration, youth and violence, amongst others. She's also served on Mexico's technical committee for the evaluation of the Federal Registry of Voters, where she evaluated the timeliness with which youth were included in the registry. So we're very excited to have Dr. Rivera with us today, both because of her expertise and deep experience in Mexico, but also because of the importance and timeliness of this topic. So with no further delay, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Rivera. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you, Mike. I'm very happy to be here today. I'll be, and actually talking about a topic that I've worked for quite some time now, which is the division of household and care work in Mexico. And in my talk today, I will be focusing on how this work is distributed across household members and the implications in terms of who is caring for whom. So just to start, and to have everyone on the same ground. Today I will be talking about what is commonly referred to as unpaid care work. And by this, we mean everything that is considered a service that is produced and consumed in the household. These are actually services that if we could acquire them in the marketplace, we'd be paying for them. But most of them are actually in Mexico and in most other places of the world. These are things that are being carried on by household members commonly. And this work is most commonly done by women. What in specific are we labeling unpaid care work? We can think, I was saying, it's the services that we are producing and consuming in the household without paying for them. And we can think in terms of two broad categories. One is housework, and we consider housework care because everything that we do in terms of, for example, preparing food, doing laundry, cleaning the household, getting things so we have while doing the shopping, so we have things in the household, is actually part of what is commonly known as the social reproduction. And it's labeled care because without that, we couldn't carry on without our lives. And we do that for ourselves, and we do that for other household members. The other broad category of unpaid care work is actually direct care. And most commonly, we think of care in the household in terms of care for the children, for the elder, and for those who are deceased. And what we include in this direct care are things for like making sure that children are ready, that they are bathed, that they are clean, waking them up, supervising them, and seeing that they do their homework. The same with conducting or doing any physical therapy for people who might need them, or even driving people to places. So you can see what a broad range of activities this includes. Why is it important to study unpaid care work? Well, one of the most important reasons is that this is really work. It consumes a lot of time. And as I said before, if we were paying for or obtaining this in the market, we would be paying for it. It's work that someone else would be doing. So we need to see what is being done in the household and what's being done without a pay to recognize this as an economic activity and as something that is important for the social reproduction of labor and of generations in general. A second reason is
I'm sorry to interrupt. It doesn't appear that the slide deck is proceeding. I think you're moving on to new slides, but I'm still seeing the title slide there.
Oh, I don't know what's happening because okay, things are moving on my screen. Can you see the changes now?
I cannot. Can others see it? No.
Well, let me stop my share and share again and see if that changes things. So no, but that's not the one that we want to share. Hold on. I don't know. Is it sharing now the correct slide?
We're seeing the slide that's labeled analysis of UCW in Mexico data.
Okay. And
it's moving, yes.
Things are moving.
Yes,
okay.
I think it's working now.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Let me, yeah, I don't know why things were not synchronized. But anyway, so I'll go on quickly with the implications for unpaid care work, or why we need to study. I was saying this is mostly work done by women, and it consumes an important amount of their time. And given that it always comes with a trade-off, mostly in terms of paid work. And as a consequence, that affects women's economic opportunities, their ability to be financially independent, the time they have for leisure and for resting, and also the bargaining power within the household. Given all these, the distribution on paid care work has important policy implications, both in terms of gender equality, but also in terms of the incorporation of women and youth in general into the labor market. And we need to understand what's going on, to measure it and to understand it, so we can make evidence-based decisions. And finally, another important reason is that care has a very important component in terms of the demographic composition of the population. As things change, as societies move from Jews, well, societies where Jews are very present, to those where the elderly are more important, as is happening in the case of Mexico, that needs for care also shift, and who might be conducting that care also changes. So I'll be talking about all these today. Now, in my presentation, I'll be focusing not only on paid care work, but I will be paying special attention to who does contribute to this unpaid care work. Most studies focus on the distribution of unpaid care work within couples. It's very likely that those who are in the audience today have been reading about how COVID-19 has been affecting the time that women and mothers have to work because they have to take care of children, etc. So, but they are not the only ones that are doing this. While most unpaid care work is done by female married women or the female household heads, other household members also contribute, and in some cases very importantly, as we will see today. So recognizing this is important for what is commonly labeled as the recognize, reduce, and redistribute strategies, which is the most prescribed measure to change things in terms of the distribution of labor within the household. Just to give you an idea of how things are throughout the world, this figure is showing the difference between the time that men and women work in different activities throughout the world. Anything that is above the zero axis and means that men do more, whereas everything that is below means that women do more of that activity. And we are showing market work in green, unpaid care work in blue, and total work, which is the sum of market work and unpaid care work, in purple. And you can see that in the case of Mexico, women do more unpaid care work than men. And they also work more than men in total once we add market work and unpaid care work. But we can also see that this is common across all countries. I mean, this happens even in developed countries as the US, Italy, Spain, but also in throughout the continents of other countries in Latin America, such as Costa Rica, etc. Now, the differences between women's unpaid care work and total work in Mexico is the second largest, only below or behind India. So that's something to keep in mind. My presentation focuses on data in Mexico. And for that, most of these analyses are conducted with what is commonly known as time use surveys. In this case, I will be using the National Time Use Survey in Mexico. The latest one was in 2014. And to be able to do this, this kind of analysis, the Mexican Time Use Survey captures an exhaustive list of activities, which is meant to include everything that people do commonly, and it asks for a record of these activities 24 hours a day for the last week. The sample has almost 29,000 households, and it includes all members of the household that are 12 years old and older, which actually is very convenient because it allows me to do this analysis of the participation of different household members and how these care networks work. So in this figure, I am showing how market or paid work and unpaid care work behave throughout the life course. On the left-hand side, we have women. On the right-hand side, we have men. In blue, we have unpaid care work. And in yellow, we have what is the time allocated for market goods and services. We can see that if we focus on women, their unpaid care work starts early on. I mean, from age 15, they are allocating a huge amount of time to unpaid care work. And the time allocated for market goods and services increases with productive ages. Now, if we go, but it's always actually one thing that is important is that it is always less than the time that women allocate on average to unpaid care work. Now, comparing that with the behavior of men, we have that men also do unpaid care work, but it is always less than the time that women do. They also allocate time to unpaid care work throughout the whole lifetime. And not surprisingly, they allocate more time to market work than women throughout the whole life. The other thing I want you to notice is that on the peak age, productive ages, which is between age 25 and 45, the time that women work overall is greater than the time that men work overall. Now, the table below shows how much time we would expect men and women to allocate to market work and to unpaid care work throughout their lifetime, starting from age 12. And this is a summary measure of these gender inequalities. Starting from age 12, a woman in Mexico can expect to work 4 years, 5 months on market work, whereas men can expect to work 18 years, 6 months on market work. Now, women are allocating 8 years and 10 months of their time to unpaid care work, whereas men are only allocating 3 years, 6 months. So in the previous slides, we saw already that women are doing unpaid care work, and men also, throughout the whole lifetime. But what happens within the household? In the next figures, I'll be showing that. I'll be showing who cares for whom or who does what amount of care work, and how, in particular, dividing by housework and care, by different stages of the life of the household life cycle. So we'll start with housework, which is, as I explained before, the time that individuals spend on getting the household ready, and which is unpaid. In this slide, I'm showing the distribution of housework or in households that do not have children. We can see that on average, women do 50% of housework when there are no children in the house. Men are contributing about 30%. But there's also a contribution of other female household members. Things change, however, as the household moves through the life cycle. So when there are children 0 to 14 years old, women do most of housework. They move from doing 50% to doing 67% of housework. And then we can see that as soon as children arrive, the contribution of men to housework decreases to 10%. And there are other members contributing, but that's mainly female children who are young, 15 to 29 years old. As the household starts moving towards a life stage where they don't have any small children, but they have still children in young ages, the female head or the spouse of the head still does most of the housework. But then the contribution of the female children increases to a little more than 20%. And the male head or the male spouse of the head continues doing a marginal 10%. Now I'll move quickly. Something similar happens when all children are grown. And then when we move to what is considered households that where the couple is or the head is older than 60 years old. Most housework is still concentrated on the female head, but then the male head starts contributing a little more, and we keep some contribution from other children. So in sum, in terms of housework, the female head or spouse always does the majority of housework. And this happens throughout the whole life cycle of the household. Now, even when the female head or spouse does most of the work, the distribution of housework varies throughout the household life cycle, depending on who is available to contribute. But most of these additional contributions are either by the male head or by female children. Male children do not contribute significantly. Let's now move on to childcare. When there are small children in the house, or children 0 to 14 years old, most of the childcare is done by the female head or spouse, who are doing 65% of childcare. We have men doing 20%, but we also have female children in young ages, 15 to 29, contributing each an average of 7% of childcare. Households with children 0 to 14 are not the only households that have children present. I mean, it can be that as a household moves through the life cycle, children enter the household because they are the child or the children of the household head or the grandchildren. So the next slides show actually that childcare in general is always very shared. When there, so as is the case in this slide where we have children 50 to 29. Most of the childcare is done by these members, but then we have that the female head or spouse is doing about 20% of the care, which is basically showing the contribution between grandmothers and female or mothers in extended households. Something similar happens when we have households where all children are grown. This is the presence of extended households, or when the head is is older than 60 years old. We have a very distributed load of childcare, which is being shared by the female head or the spouse and female children. And we can want you to see that male heads or spouses and male children do not contribute noticeably to childcare at all. Childcare is a female activity, and it's also a shared activity. We have an activity that is shared across many generations, but it's mostly female. Next, we'll see what happens with elder care, and the story here is different. So we'll go through the life cycle again. In young households with no children, most of elder care is done by the female head or spouse, who's doing 53% of care. We have that other female household members are doing 23% of elder care, and this can be daughters-in-law, mostly, and we have that the male head or spouse is contributing about 17%. So there's some male contribution in these cases. In households that have children 0 to 14 years old, but also need elder care, interestingly, the elder care is distributed almost evenly between the male head or spouse and the female head or spouse. So we see that childcare was not shared with men, but in these conditions, the male members do contribute. I'm sorry, Mike, do you want to say something?
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No problem. So we see some more sharing across genders in elder care. This figure shows that actually, when there are grown children in the household, when there are children 50 to 29, we can see that that elder care is distributed across the male head or spouse, the female head or spouse, male children, and female children. And it is important to notice that in these cases, the male members are actually contributing almost as equally to what female members are contributing. Finally, in the life cycle stage, we have those households where the head is 60 years or older. And we can imagine in terms of what kind of elder care is needed here, that is caring both for the head or for the spouse of the head or for the elder parents, right? Notice that the male head does almost 37% of the elder care in these cases, whereas female heads do about 27%. And then we have a contribution of elder children or children who are 30 years old or older, which is almost equal between female members and female children and male children. So in sum, we have that in the case of elder care, there is greater sharing across sexes and generations and types of household members than across housework and childcare. Now, I started by saying that most studies focus on how the housework is divided between couples. One very important implication of the numbers of the figures I just showed you is that unmarried children and young children do an important part of unpaid care work. And just to give you an idea of how important that is, I am showing you here, and I see that I don't have the labels, the total amount of work done by unmarried young adults in the household, which is basically children, by sex and by age groups. We have on the left-hand side men, we have on the right-hand side women, and the stars indicate significant differences between men and women. But what I want you to see is that if we don't analyze housework and care done by young family members, we can miss an important part of their time. So if we go, just to give you an idea, we can go to the bar to the farthest right, and you'll see that by age 25 to 29, unmarried young women are working or contributing 21.7 hours per week to housework. That's a little more than a part-time job. And they contribute 5 hours on average to direct care. So on average, they are doing 26 hours of unpaid care work. That's, of course, extreme because unpaid care work increases with age. But even by age 12 to 14, women are doing 14 hours of unpaid care work in Mexico. That's important. That's really significant, and it affects actually their leisure time. So if we were to sum up, the most important messages of my presentation were that women are responsible for most of paid care work, in addition to being engaged in paid employment, which implies that in the end, they end up working more than men in terms of total hours. The second thing is that this work is not only done by household heads or the spouse of the household head, but by different household members. So to solve their unpaid care work needs, households rely on the support of various household members, mostly female members, at least for housework and for childcare. And thirdly, that acknowledging their contribution of unmarried young adults and other household members in unpaid care work is necessary. I mean, we could be missing up to a half-time average or part-time contribution of time to unpaid care work. So it is necessary to recognize this work, to know who is already contributing, to know how much we need to reduce it, but also to prevent unintended consequences of various distribution policies that might have negative implications for the total amount of work that young women do, and especially young women do if we don't consider this. So that is my, those are the main findings I wanted to share with you today. You can contact me in case of any questions or further inquiries. There is an analysis of how this affects the time that women allocate to to care, and how that might have changed with COVID. You can find the link here, but you can also find more information both in the case of Mexico and in the case of other countries in the Counting Women's Work Project, and I'm leaving the website with you. And with that, I'd love to hear your comments and questions.
Well, thank you very much for that presentation. I found it super interesting. I have tons of questions. I'll invite people to submit any questions they have via the chat. I'm sure people have questions as well, but I'll get us started. So I mean, the first kind of most glaring thing that I'm curious about is it was interesting when you got to elder care, seeing how different the distribution looked. That men finally stepped up and actually contributed something. Why do you think that is? What is the difference with elder care? Is there an affinity for our parents that we don't have for our children that makes us more inclined to support? Do you have explanations or reasons that might be the case?
Sure. There are several reasons. In another study we did of who contributes to households, to elder care within households, one thing that is very glaring is that as the household ages itself, as it moves through the life cycle, there may not be other people who are available to contribute, and then the male members have to do something. So that's why the spouse might be caring for the wife. The other thing is that the other thing that has been found in Mexico and in other countries is that there is an affinity towards the mother, so that, and a shared responsibility. So that is why we see a contribution from different household members, including male household members. And thirdly, this shared contribution has an angle of a specialization itself. I mean, that happens in the case of the US. There is a study that sees how different children have different tasks. And in the case of Mexico, that happens as well. I mean, there are some, the spouse might be the main caregiver. There might be a child or usually the female child that takes care of which are hard activities such as bathing, dressing the mother or the father. And then the male children are like the pamperers, or what we call the emotional caregivers, but that's important time as well. So they might be the ones that visit, that convince all their parents to take their medications, that are actually spending time with them, so their mood is okay. So we can actually see this specialization. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. It brings to mind another kind of question: is the differences of families, right? I mean, we have in Mexico, but really around the world, a wide variety of families, from the very extended, including cousins and grandparents, to single mothers. And I'm curious what that does to the data. If single-headed families with women at the head of the household are more likely to have children in them than single male-headed families, does that, I doubt it distorts the data enough to be deceptive, but does that lead to an increase in the amount of women caregivers when women-headed households, this is a presumption on my part, so maybe it's false, are more likely to have children in them?
Well, it might. It is not affecting the averages I'm giving, because I'm not dividing by the sex of the head. Though, yeah, I mean, if you were to do this on a micro level analysis, that's something that you might want to consider. But in here, we're broadly speaking in terms of age of the household individuals. So that doesn't really affect. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. We have a question here from Geraldine Meehan. She wants to know if you could comment a little on your earlier remark about how Mexico compares to India in terms of women's share of unpaid work. India, of course, being one of the other places where it's disproportionately larger.
I was muted, I'm sorry. And certainly, I think it might be useful to share my screen again. So let me just go back to that. Oh, should have found this before, but let me go back to that slide. So of all the countries we have data for in the Counting Women's Work project, India is the one where there are largest differences between men and women in terms of share work. The other thing is, and you can see it here, I mean, India is marked by IN, is that in part this is because Indian men work more on the more hours on the labor market than other countries, and women specialize way more on unpaid care work. But then if we compare, and I was saying Mexico is the second country following just India. They are very likely in terms of the specialization. But if you see the blue bar, Mexico is the MX country. Whereas in India, women work on average 40 hours more on paid work, on unpaid care work than in the case of men. In women, in Mexico, this difference is an average 35 hours. And we can also see that the difference in terms of paid work or market work in Mexico is about 32 hours. So this is basically because of female labor market participation overall in Mexico is a little larger than in India. So the general differences aren't as big. But I think something that is remarkable of this slide, and it has only some of the countries that we have data for, is that everywhere throughout the world, women work more time on average than men. Men work more hours on the market than women. Women work more hours on unpaid work. That doesn't mean that they are not working on unpaid work. But also, if we look at the purple bar, the total workload of women is greater. And so if we take market work and unpaid care work together, women work more hours than men. And that can lead to differences of up to 12 hours, as is the case in Senegal, to 4 hours per week, as is the case in Mexico.
Thank you. While you have the PowerPoint back up, Angie has a question about the chart comparing hours of education, which I think was slide 24. She says, it seems that females contributed more hours than males as children, teens and young adults. Are there strategies within the education systems in Mexico that focus on encouraging and empowering female students to pursue advanced education or a professional career?
Sure, let me go to that slide. I think it's I don't know how to move many slides by once. So the gender gap in education in the case of Mexico has been decreasing throughout time. In the last 15 years, I mean, women are up to par in or equal to men in terms of basic education. And in the case of middle and higher education in some sectors, actually, women are more present than men. I mean, they have higher continuation rates. This is showing the hours. That doesn't, so there were strategies to encourage women's continuation in education, but now we are seeing that men or that young men are dropping out more than women. This is not seen here. This is in this slide. This slide, and I can see why you refer to education, but if you remember what we have, the bars that we have on the left are the ones that refer to women. And I apologize, I didn't notice that my labels were missing. So everything that is on the left here is women, everything that is on the right is men. And we can see that in the 12 to 14 years old, women spend most of the same time than men. I mean, the difference between the time that men and women spend on education is not significant. But then in the age groups 15 to 19 and 20 to 24, women actually spend more time on education than men. And this has to do with two things. One is on average the presence of women in education in these age groups, but also the time that those who are in school are allocating to the school. And then on the 25 to 29, which is really not the normal education years anymore, but refers to those who might be doing graduate work, there are, again, no differences between sexes. I don't know if that answers Angie's question.
Great. So another question here from Christina. What are the consequences for women going back to the workforce after having children over 15 years old? Do they reincorporate to the workforce, or is it difficult, or are they unable to do that?
That is a good question. Female labor force participation in Mexico has been increasing throughout the years. I don't have the exact number now, but it's about 40%. So women do go back to work after, I mean, women are working in the labor force participation. I'm not actually studying how there's an exchange between childcare, having children, and participating in the labor market. There are many studies in Mexico that show that mothers in Mexico who go back to the who are working suffer from a child tax in terms of the hours and the pay that they receive. But my analysis actually shows that those who are working and have children, and we can see it here. These are average numbers, but it is very clear here. I'm sorry. The 25 to 45 ages are the prime productive ages, and know where people might have children or small children. And we can see that women are participating in the labor market. They are allocating less time, so but they are working, doing care work as well. And these are exactly the ages where women work in total more than men. They work on average of 8 hours more than men during that age group. And that is because they are combining unpaid care work or care work with market work.
Great. Another question here from Dennis about that same slide we were looking at previously. She asks two questions, actually. One is do the asterisks indicate a statistical significance in terms of gender differences? And also, she recalls from other literature that participation in household work, chores, etc., does not have an effect on academic performance. But 12 to 17 hours that we see on this chart is a lot. Do you know if there's research on the effect of this on education in Mexico?
Yes. The first question, yes. Asterisks mark a difference by gender. So, for example, the 1 point, actually, let's go to housework. If we compare the 12 to 14 years old, men on average are doing 7.8 hours. Women are giving 12.1. That is differently. Women are doing significantly more than boys. Now, in terms of the second question, we don't know about academic performance. I don't know of any study, at least in the case of Mexico, that looks at the time or the implications of the time that women and men, or young boys and girls, are doing of unpaid care work. But I am doing some analysis of the consequences of doing unpaid care work on dropping out of school and then on returning to school once they have dropped out. And one of the things that I found is that for women, and this is mostly women after 12 years old because that's what we have data for, doing unpaid care work significantly affects the probability of dropping out of a school over time, but it does not affect men. Now, among those who have left the school already, doing care work actually affects the probability of going back to school or going to work, both for boys and girls. So it is another way to see the implications of unpaid care work on the school and employment continuation among the very young.
Wonderful. It's very interesting. I'm curious about, and Dennis says over the chat, thank you, very interesting as well. Great job. I'm curious about extended families. I know you touched on this in your presentation. To what extent, if any, do membership in extended families, large groups, where household labors can be shared, and one woman or one household member can take on more of the responsibility of chores, household work, is it more common to see in those extended families women that are then able to increase market work as a result? Is there a connection there where that's less common in smaller families, or is that not data that you have?
It is data that we have. I mean, we do have the data to do that kind of analysis. We haven't done it yet, but that's a great question. So that might be something that we look at in the future.
Feel free to put me down as a co-author.
I will. Yeah. No. Let's talk.
Well, again, please feel free, anyone who's interested, to submit additional questions via the chat. I've said before, at every lecture these days, we have to have a question about the pandemic. And I know this information is from 2014. I believe that's when you said the data was collected. But I'm curious how you would expect these numbers, if at all, to have been affected by the pandemic and the lockdown.
Sure. Well, I didn't actually present that, but I've done some analysis, of course, with 2014 data. So it's only, it has a lot of assumptions. But one of the things I found, well, actually, I'll tell you what I did. To get an idea of how the pandemic might be affecting the distribution of work between men and women. One way to look at it is to see how many hours the work and other time use of household members changes when there are household members that are ill, and how that changes by sex. And one of the things we've found is that, again, most of the housework, unpaid care work among those who are ill relies on women. And when there are ill family members, women's work increased 10 hours of direct care, which is half a part-time job. They also increased 4 hours of supervision, but they have to decrease. I mean, now a day has only 24 hours, right? So they have to compensate. And what suffers most is their paid work. They decrease 4 hours of paid work. They decrease 5 hours of sleep and leisure. So those, of course, are just an indication of what the consequences might be. In the case of men, men do not increase their contribution to unpaid care work, but they increase 3 hours of housework per week. And what suffers in their case is sleep.
Well,
so
and
yeah,
I imagine
there are unequal consequences of living with ill members. In the case now, we can only expect this to be greater in the case of COVID, where housework increases, children are in school, and in addition, if there are several household members, this needs to be taken care by household members. Mm-hmm.
And presumably we would see, at least in some families, a decrease in market work as well, given the lockdown and the economic downturn. Not an intentional reduction in that work, but just an unfortunate one as a result of the circumstances.
No, absolutely. I mean, yes, my results are suggesting that women's paid work is decreasing 4 hours when there are ill household members. But this is very differently from the situation of COVID, of course, because COVID is actually impacting employment. And as you said, one of the things that is happening is that especially young individuals and women are being let go or decreasing their employment hours, not So this will actually lead to rearrangement in terms of who cares for whom. And it might be that women increase even more than young individuals also start doing more housework and more care work, and that this might affect their returning to school once things stabilize. Mm-hmm.
We have a question here from Esteban in Chile. He asks, he says he missed part of the presentation, so he apologizes if this was covered. But he wants to know if you know what is the impact of household work of women on poverty levels in Mexico. Is there a connection between levels of household work and poverty rates?
Yes, there is. I didn't show anything, there are different studies that have actually, including some analysis that I've done myself, that shows that women in less educated households allocate more time to unpaid care work than those who are more educated and those who are in better off households. It is difficult actually to differentiate the effect of education in terms of the distribution of work, and also in terms of how women participate in the labor market. But there are several studies that haven't done that. So if Esteban is interested on that, I can send him some references.
Wonderful. So I see we're at noon Mexico City time, 1 o'clock South Bend. Thank you very much, Stella, for this presentation. I found it really fascinating. It's such an interesting topic, an important topic, and one that there's a deep need for, and obviously deep data to mine as well. So thank you very much for joining us. Before we depart, I just want to thank everyone else as well for joining us today. Remind you that this is an ongoing series, so pay attention to your emails for future events. In the fall semester, we'll actually be highlighting the work of Notre Dame graduate students. So we'll be looking at advanced PhD students working on dissertations in and around and connected to Mexico, and exploring some of the great work they're doing. So again, thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Rivero, thank you in particular for joining us. I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you, Michael. I just want to leave everyone with my information in case they want to follow up or have any questions.
Great.